How did several hundred warriors dare to challenge a human tide of over 100,000 soldiers facing the inevitable and enter legend? Welcome to Collapse, where history changes forever. Today, we dive into one of the most heroic battles of antiquity, the Battle of Thermopylae. In the narrow pass bordering the Aegean Sea, a handful of Greek warriors prepares to face the overwhelming tide of the Persian army. Under the banners of Leonidas, 300 Spartans and their allies stand against the most powerful empire of their time. A desperate struggle, a legendary sacrifice, a challenge thrown at destiny itself. For here, at the gates of Greece, it's no longer just about victory or defeat, but eternal glory against oblivion. But before setting off on a new adventure, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and bon voyage. At the beginning of the 5th century BC, the world was already a stage for vast political and cultural dynamics that would shape history across several continents. To understand the subsequent events that would profoundly mark the Mediterranean and antiquity, it is essential to paint a global picture of the international situation at the time. The 5th century BC is emblematic of the tremendous dynamism stirring Asia, in the broad sense of the time. As the eastern lands stretched from the shores of the Mediterranean to the borders of the Indus and beyond, the multiplicity of peoples and kingdoms found there as a key factor in understanding future rivalries and alliances. Despite the great diversity of cultures and languages, a nascent power gradually imposes itself as the most extensive empire of its time, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. The Achaemenid Persian Empire owes its foundation to Cyrus II, known as Cyrus the Great, around 550 BC. Originating from southern Iran, he managed to unify the Persian and Median tribes, then successively seize Lydia, in present-day Western Turkey, Babylonia, in Mesopotamia, and other neighboring territories. He quickly forged a reputation as a strategist and tolerant conqueror, capable of integrating entire regions without destroying them. His successor, Cambyses II, continued the expansion towards Egypt, which he subdued after a difficult military campaign. Together, Cyrus and Cambyses laid the foundations of a vast empire that would extend, in its greatest dimensions, from the gates of Greece to the regions of the Indus, on the Indian subcontinent, and from the Caucasus to the boundaries of the Gulf of Oman. After Cambyses II's death, the succession was complex. It is ultimately Darius I who asserts his position, perhaps through indirect dynastic ties, but mainly thanks to his political skill and military support. Darius consolidates and reorganizes the Persian Empire in a very structured manner. He establishes a system of satrapies, i.e., provinces administered by satraps, governors appointed to represent central authority, ensure tax collection, maintain order, and levy troops if necessary. To further cement his power, Darius establishes an impressive network of roads, the most famous being the Royal Road, linking Susa in Elam, modern southwestern Iran, to Sardis in western Asia Minor. This communication route facilitates trade, army movements, and the rapid transmission of official messages through a relay system. Moreover, Darius issues a gold currency, the daric, thus contributing to the unification of financial exchanges across his territory. The resulting economic flourishing gives Persia considerable influence, and the Achaemenid dynasty gains prestige. Under Darius I, the Persian Empire experiences notable economic growth. The many subjugated peoples often retain their religion and customs, which limits rebellions. The raw materials from each region, grain, precious metals, wood, livestock, circulate more easily, in turn fueling the empire's prosperity. Thanks to the taxes collected and the rigorous organization of its administration, Persia possesses unprecedented financial resources, enabling it to maintain a powerful army and develop infrastructures. This army comprises contingents from various provinces, massive archers from Mesopotamia, horsemen from the Iranian steppe, Egyptian infantry, and so forth. This diversity, framed by the elite core of immortals, makes it a formidable force. Since the conquest of Cambyses II, Egypt has been integrated into the Persian Empire as a satrapy. However, the Egyptian national sentiment remains strong, leading to occasional uprisings. Some revolts occur shortly after Cambyses' death, others under Darius I, who strives to calm the spirits by partially respecting local cults and temples. Despite these appeasement attempts, Egypt remains a sensitive point of the empire, requiring the Achaemenid rulers to maintain a reinforced military presence there. Mesopotamia, the cradle of ancient civilizations such as Sumer, Babylon, or Assyria, is now under Persian domination. Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 before Christ, ending the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Mesopotamian cities, proud of their past, become fully integrated into the Achaemenid Empire while retaining relative administrative autonomy. The Babylonian elites, scribes, and priests play an important role in the Persian bureaucratic apparatus, allowing Darius to govern these territories without too much resistance, at least at the beginning of his reign. On its eastern border, Persia reaches regions corresponding today to Pakistan and the northwestern part of India. During Darius's military campaigns, these areas are partly conquered or placed under a vassal status. Revenues from the Indian subcontinent are among the highest in the empire, thanks to its wealth in gold and exotic products. Although there are few written records of reciprocal exchanges at this time, it is nonetheless known that Persia acts as a bridge between Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Indian cultures, facilitating the circulation of goods and sometimes ideas and techniques. In the far east of the Asian continent, China is experiencing a period of upheaval known as the Warring States period, roughly spanning from the 5th to the 3rd century before Christ. At this time, the Zhou dynasty, officially in power, no longer truly dominates the entire Chinese territory. Several feudal entities, such as Qin, Chu, Zhao, or Wei, engage in a fierce struggle for supremacy, seeking to expand their borders or consolidate their base. Even though this region of the world is very distant from the Mediterranean and direct contacts with the West, including Persia, remain limited, it's important to highlight the simultaneity of different great civilizational entities. China, beset by its own internal wars, is experiencing advances in the art of war, philosophy. Confucius lives between the 6th and 5th centuries before Christ, and political organization. Nonetheless, the geographical distance and absence of perfectly connected trade routes prevent, at this period, a strong Chinese influence on the West, and vice versa. At this time, Western and Central Europe are not dominated by a unified empire. Notably, Celtic tribes, sometimes referred to as Gauls in later sources, occupy and gradually expand their territory. These peoples, spread over a wide area from what are now the regions of Austria and Switzerland to the German-speaking plains, are characterized by remarkable craftsmanship, metalwork, jewelry, weapons, and various tribal organizations. Although the Celts do not pose a direct threat to Persia or Greece in the 5th century before Christ, they play a role in inter-regional trade, notably providing tin or other prized raw materials to southern Europe. Land and river routes linking the Mediterranean to Central Europe help circulate goods, but also ideas and cultural influences to a lesser extent. During this time, in the Italian peninsula, several cultures coexist. The Etruscans, who occupy a large area in central Italy, have already reached a notable level of development, with urban cities, refined artistic culture, and active maritime trade in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Their influence extends to the north and south, deeply marking the region, notably the future Rome. Specifically, Rome, in the 5th century before Christ, is still far from realizing its imperial destiny. The city, according to tradition founded in the 8th century before Christ, has recently been governed by a republican system. The end of the Roman monarchy is traditionally dated around 509 before Christ. However, its rivalries with neighboring cities in Latium and the pressure exerted by the Etruscans in the north limit its expansion. Rome is still a local player, far less powerful than Persia, and even less influential than many Greek cities or Carthage, a great maritime power in North Africa. To the east of the Mediterranean basin, for several centuries already, the Phoenicians have dominated maritime trade with their fast ships and advanced knowledge of navigation. Originating from city-states like Tyre, Sidon, or Byblos, territories roughly corresponding to present-day Lebanon, they have spread a network of trading posts across the Mediterranean, including the famous colony of Carthage, founded according to tradition in the 9th century before Christ. The Phoenicians are renowned for their alphabet, one of the oldest, which will influence both Greek and Latin alphabets. In the 5th century before Christ, their relations with Persia are relatively peaceful, as Persian dominion allows the Phoenicians to continue their trading activities in exchange for tributes and recognition of imperial authority. Moreover, the Phoenician fleet is sometimes enlisted by Persia to enhance its naval capabilities, as Phoenician sailors are well versed in maritime routes and navigation techniques. Further west, on the coasts of Asia Minor, there are numerous Greek cities often grouped under the name of Ionia, the present Aegean coast of Turkey. These city-states, formerly autonomous, fell under the control of the Lydians, and then, after Lydia's conquest by Cyrus the Great, under Persian control. This means that at the beginning of the 5th century before Christ, the Greeks of Ionia are subjected to the Persian satrapy of Lydia. The relations between these Greek cities and their Persian rulers are complex. Some cities collaborate in exchange for privileges or a certain degree of administrative autonomy. Others are dissatisfied with the rule and pay high tributes. At the beginning of the century, this discontent will lead to the Ionian Revolt, which Persia will suppress severely. This episode is fundamental as it marks one of the first direct conflicts between Greek civilization and the powerful Achaemenid Empire. At the start of the 5th century before Christ, the Greek world presents itself as a fragmented ensemble of city-states known as polis, each jealous of its independence and determined to defend its own interests. Greece does not form a nation in the modern sense. It is rather a network of autonomous urban communities scattered around the Aegean Sea, from the Peloponnese to the Ionian Islands, and even beyond in Asia Minor. Each city-state has its own territory, laws, and institutions, leading to frequent and sometimes extremely violent internal conflicts. Despite a common language and culture, Greek identity is primarily experienced at the local level, with varied forms of government and ever-volatile political rivalries. In this context, in the 5th century before Christ, several centers of influence stand out: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and other more modest cities. Alliances may easily form or dissolve depending on the events, and Pan-Hellenic cohesion remains a rarely achieved ideal, although cultural unity is concretely illustrated by common religious practices and the celebration of sacred athletic games like those of Olympia. To understand the issues preceding major confrontations with the Persian Empire, it is essential to paint a picture of these polis and their governments. First, Athens is renowned for its nascent democratic system, which grants an unprecedented role to citizens in the management of the city. Corinth, a maritime and commercial city, operates under an oligarchic regime where power belongs to a small number of influential families. Thebes, on the other hand, is located north of Athens in the region of Boeotia and has its own political structures, often oscillating between oligarchy and aristocratic influences. These differences in modes of government fuel enduring rivalries. The Athenian democracy, which honors the decisions of the citizens' assembly, regularly clashes with the more conservative views of Sparta and its allies. The city-states alternately ally or confront each other, making the Greek peninsula in the early 5th century before Christ a politically fragmented space whose cohesion is slow to solidify. Among these powers, Sparta occupies a singular position. Located in the south of the Peloponnese, in the region of Laconia, it stands out for its unique and highly hierarchical political system. At the top, 2 kings reign simultaneously, from 2 distinct lineages. According to tradition, these lineages descend from 2 legendary twins. In practice, the 2 rulers share religious, judicial, and military functions, although often, in times of war, one of them leads the army on the field. Alongside them, the Council of Elders, also known as the Gerousia, consists of 28 citizens over the age of 60, chosen for life, along with the 2 kings. This council proposes the laws that the assembly of free men, the Apella, must then approve or reject. Finally, 5 magistrates, the ephors, elected annually, have a great deal of initiative and oversight power. They monitor the actions of the kings and ensure the respect of traditions. Spartan social organization reflects this emphasis on discipline and cohesion. Native Spartans, called homoioi, literally equals, are trained from adolescence in combat through the agoge, a strict educational system that combines military training, physical hardening, and strict obedience to authority. Children are taken from their homes at the age of 7 to undergo this training, aiming to make them infallible warriors, capable of withstanding hunger, thirst, and pain. Courage, loyalty to the city, and the habit of facing death are among the cardinal values exalted in Sparta, thus forging a reputation as a warrior citadel. In parallel, the Helots, an enslaved population from conquered regions, ensure agricultural production, allowing the homoioi to devote themselves almost exclusively to war and politics. This unique military strength grants Sparta leadership within the Peloponnesian League, a defensive alliance centered on Sparta and bringing together several city-states from southern Greece. The primary objective of this league is to ensure the mutual protection of its members against any external aggressor, but it sometimes also serves Sparta's expansionist projects. The allies, bound by bilateral treaties with the Lacedaemonian power, a term often used to refer to Sparta, agree to supply contingents or resources as needed. Thus, at the beginning of the 5th century before Christ, Sparta embodies an undisputed military pivot, feared and respected even beyond its borders. Faced with the Spartan warrior culture, Athens offers a different image of Greek political and social organization. Located in the region of Attica, the Athenian city-state underwent various reforms that gradually led it to democracy. At the turn of the 6th century before Christ, lawmakers like Draco and Solon laid the foundations for a more egalitarian system, notably addressing the abuses of the nobility and easing the conditions of the poorer classes. However, it is to Cleisthenes, active around 508-507 before Christ, that the establishment of Athenian democracy is commonly attributed. He reorganized the population into demes, new administrative districts, and established a council of 500, responsible for preparing laws. The sovereign body, however, remains the ecclesia, the assembly of citizens, which votes on decrees and decides the major directions of the city. In this form, Athens stands out from other Greek states by the extent of civic participation. Any male citizen born of Athenian parents could participate in political life, speak, and vote. Although this democracy remains exclusive towards women, metics, foreigners residing in Athens, and slaves, it was, for the time, an innovative model involving the majority of free men in major decisions. The growing influence of Athens is also manifested in its economic and maritime dynamism. By nature, the city-state is more inclined toward commerce than Sparta, and its port of Piraeus is one of the most active in the Aegean Sea. The exploitation of the silver mines at Laurium, located in southern Attica, provides essential resources for the financing of the fleet. By the end of the 6th century before Christ, Athens becomes increasingly interested in the sea as a means to expand its influence and ensure its security. The construction of triremes, warships equipped with 3 rows of rowers, becomes a major strategic issue. At a time when major external threats begin to arise, the burgeoning naval superiority will prove decisive. Thus, a few years before the Second Persian invasion, the city-state invests in the development of its navy, foreshadowing what will later become the famous naval Battle of Salamis, 480 before Christ. At this stage, however, Athens is still seeking recognition, and the league it attempts to form around itself does not match the solidity of the Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta. The relations between the Greek world and the Persians, already conflictual, worsen at the end of the 6th century before Christ. In the region of Ionia, Greek cities like Miletus or Ephesus have lived under the tutelage of the Persian Empire since the conquests of Cyrus the Great and then Darius I. However, these cities remain culturally Greek and share a language, beliefs, and a strong sense of city autonomy. Around 499 before Christ, driven by a desire for independence and encouraged by some support from the mainland, they rise against Persian domination. This is the famous Ionian Revolt. Athens sends a contingent to support the Ionians in their struggle, a gesture perceived by Darius I as a true provocation. The Ionian Revolt is crushed in 494, before Christ with the capture of Miletus, but the affront suffered by Persia is not forgotten. This episode constitutes the first act in the confrontation that will see the Persians attempt to punish the Greeks and put an end to their interference. In 490, before Christ, Darius I launches the first Persian invasion against the Greek mainland. A maritime expedition crosses the Aegean Sea, subjugating certain islands along the way, before landing on the coast of Attica at Marathon, a coastal plain located about 40 kilometers northeast of Athens. The Athenians, led by the strategist Miltiades, hastily organized to confront the Persian forces there. Despite their numerical inferiority, the Athenian hoplites achieve a resounding victory. The Battle of Marathon is often considered the first great demonstration of Greek capability to resist an external invader. According to legend, a messenger named Phidippides is said to have run to Athens to announce the victory before dying of exhaustion, an event commemorated today through the sporting event of the marathon. The importance of Marathon lies not only in the military feat, but also in its political repercussions. The victory shows that a determined city can repel the army of the great king, challenged from the other side of the Aegean Sea. This newfound confidence seals Athens' reputation as the citadel of Greek freedom. The young democracy proves that it can not only make quick decisions, but also effectively mobilize its citizens. At the same time, other cities realize that the Persian threat is indeed real and is not limited to the Greeks of Asia Minor. Sparta, renowned for its terrestrial power, did not participate in the Battle of Marathon for religious and calendrical reasons. It could not dispatch its troops in time. The event, however, contributes to raising awareness throughout the Greek world of the necessity for some form of cooperation, even if perfect unity is still far from achieved. Indeed, this first Persian invasion fuels debates within the cities. Should they ally to face the common enemy? Can internal quarrels be set aside? The events of 490 before Christ start a beginning of collective reflection. Among the Greeks, some consider it would be wiser to seek an agreement with the Persians, while others, often led by Athens, advocate resistance. Fratricidal conflicts between cities persist. Athens fears Sparta as much as it admires its military superiority. Sparta, for its part, hesitates to involve itself outside its usual framework, protected by its Peloponnesian League. Corinth and Thebes also nurture their own interests and do not feel directly concerned as long as they are not threatened. Darius I, father of Xerxes, reigned from 522 to 486 before Christ and distinguished himself by reorganizing the vast territory under his control, dividing the empire into satrapies, provinces, governed by appointed satraps. Upon his death, Xerxes faces several challenges. The first is to assert his authority against potential claimants to the throne and to quell various local revolts, notably in Egypt. This province, rich and strategically crucial, had frequently revolted against Persian domination. Xerxes then leads a punitive campaign in the region, reaffirming Achaemenid power and ensuring the fidelity of the local elites. At the same time, he consolidates his image as the great king, protector of the order and the cult of Ahura Mazda, the main Zoroastrian deity revered by many Persians. His role as king is thus reinforced by divine references that legitimize his authority. Once order is restored in the peripheral and central territories of the empire, Xerxes turns to his great objective, to correct the affront inflicted by the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon. To succeed in this campaign in Greece, Xerxes engages in preparations of unprecedented scale. This meticulous effort covers several aspects: the gathering of troops, the accumulation of logistical resources, and the construction of daring infrastructures to facilitate the progression of his immense army. The Achaemenid Empire spans thousands of kilometers, encompassing a multitude of peoples, cultures, and ways of life. Besides the Persians themselves, Xerxes requires the cooperation of many subjected populations: Medes, Elamites, Babylonians, Phoenicians, Egyptians, and many others. Each satrapy must provide a military contingent: infantry, cavalry, archers, light or specialized troops according to local traditions. Some ancient historians have proposed extremely high numbers for the Persian army, reaching several 100,000 combatants. While it is difficult to obtain precise statistics, it is known that the mobilization greatly exceeded the usual numbers of the time, as Xerxes aimed to strike the imagination of his enemies and provoke their submission even before hostilities commenced. Moreover, the constitution of food stocks is crucial. Deposits of wheat, wine, and other basic goods are gathered at key points along the army's route. The Persians had already developed communication routes, allowing the transport of these goods over long distances. Some areas of the empire, like Babylonia or Egypt, can contribute massively in supplies, which ensures Xerxes can maintain his troops during a prolonged campaign without depending solely on local resources in Greece, which are generally more limited. In this military venture, Xerxes must solve a major geographical challenge, crossing the Hellespont, now called the Dardanelles Strait, the body of water that separates Asia Minor from Europe. Rather than relying solely on transport ships, Xerxes orders the construction of a bridge of boats, a gigantic technical feat for the time. Hundreds of vessels are lined up, connected by cables, and then a deck is installed, allowing infantry, cavalry, and pack animals to cross. This initiative not only impresses the Greek armies, who now fear the onslaught of an unprecedented land force, but also galvanizes the Persian troops. Crossing a body of water considered a natural barrier asserts the technological and strategic superiority of the empire. Moreover, Xerxes improves or consolidates the land routes leading from the interior of the empire to the European borders. Relay stations are regularly established so that horses and messengers can be replaced, significantly speeding up the transmission of orders. Persian engineers also ensure the construction of minor bridges to cross secondary rivers along the route. The success of Xerxes and his campaign also heavily depends on the cooperation of provincial governors and the loyalty of the peoples within the empire. The courts of Susa and Persepolis thus see the arrival of dignitaries, each ready to take an oath of loyalty and provide the required military contingent. The eastern satrapies, less concerned with the upcoming war, contribute financially. They send precious metals, livestock, and provisions. Those in regions near the sea are encouraged to provide ships or crews. The Phoenicians in particular, renowned for their excellence in shipbuilding and maritime maneuvers, play a crucial role in the strengthening of the Persian fleet. The entire strategy devised by Xerxes is based on an essential principle, demonstrating Persian superiority over the often divided and far less populous Greek city-states compared to the Achaemenid Empire. Unlike the Greeks, organized into independent and sometimes rival city-states, the Persian Empire can align a massive coalition under the sole command of Xerxes. By combining the expertise of different peoples, the Persian army is equipped with varied forces, be it mounted archers, spearmen, heavy infantry, or light cavalry. This diversity aims to annul any staunch resistance from a specific city. In the mind of Xerxes, simply deploying such a multitude in the border regions will be enough to provoke surrenders without combat. At the same time, logistics benefits from the vast resource network available to the empire. Persian officials plan to transport not only food and weapons, but also technicians, workers, interpreters, and scribes, essential for on-site administration. The goal: to create an autonomous army capable of moving through potentially hostile territories while maintaining strict discipline. The progression into mainland Greece, overseen by Xerxes, is designed to combine an imposing land march with the support of a powerful fleet along the coasts. While columns of soldiers traverse Thrace and Macedonia, the Persian navy, including Phoenician, Egyptian, and other maritime contingents of the empire, will sail in parallel in the Aegean Sea. This maneuver aims to keep Greek cities in a vice. Those without sufficiently strong walls, fearing the landing of troops behind their lines, or dependent on maritime trade routes, will be particularly vulnerable. The Persians hope to prevent the rapid formation of a solid coalition between the cities by simultaneously threatening their lands and ports. Coordination between the land army and the fleet requires elaborate logistics and informed command. Xerxes reigns over the direction of the whole ensemble, but delegates responsibilities to his military leaders and naval officers. Each subordinate general is tasked with ensuring the execution of the great king's orders, such as the distribution of provisions and the control of localities conquered or subdued along the way. In case of resistance, the land army can receive maritime support, and conversely, the fleet can benefit from resupply from conquered points on land. Beyond brute force and technical organization, Xerxes' plan partly relies on psychology. The Persians know that many Greek cities fear their might and would prefer a form of negotiated submission to an all-out war. Persian embassies, often sent in advance, systematically demand water and earth from the cities, traditional symbols of submission. In return, Xerxes grants his protection and clemency. The cities that refuse or persist in resisting are threatened with devastating reprisals. This strongly dissuasive ultimatum aims to limit human losses in the Persian army, as Xerxes understands the magnitude of the task. Greece is fragmented, difficult to access, and its hoplite warriors are reputedly brave. Although he relies on the overwhelming numbers of his forces to win, he wants to minimize the risks of multiple uprisings. In Athens, as in Sparta, assemblies are abuzz. They debate the defense of the Greek world, watching with concern the rumors of the construction of a bridge of boats on the Hellespont. The Greek citizens gradually understand that, to escape Persian domination, they will need to coordinate their forces. On the Athenian side, the strategist Themistocles stands out with his innovative vision. He proposes to strengthen the Athenian navy to counter the Persian fleet, convinced that dominating the Aegean Sea will be crucial for the city's survival. At this time, maritime power requires significant resources, both to build triremes and to mobilize a large number of rowers. However, Athens possesses a providential windfall, the silver mines of Laurion exploited for decades. For Themistocles, these revenues should be invested in constructing a formidable fleet capable of engaging in decisive naval combat. This recommendation raises objections, as some prefer to rely more on infantry, but the assembly eventually is seduced by the bold logic of the wooden wall. This expression, taken from a Delphic oracle, plays a determining role in Greek preparations. Located at the foot of Mount Parnassus, the sanctuary of Delphi is then the most famous in the entire peninsula, and the Pythia of Apollo delivers oracles there to which the Greeks give great credence. When asked about the possible outcome of a new conflict, the prophecy mentions a wooden wall as the final life-saving plan for Athens. The Athenians discuss the meaning of this enigma. Some see it as the recommendation to fortify the city. Others suggest abandoning the city to take refuge elsewhere. Themistocles, skilled in rhetoric, defends the idea that this wall is nothing other than the fleet that must be built. Thus begins a race against time to equip Athens with a sufficient number of triremes. The shipyards of Piraeus, the city's main port, are busy day and night. Each vessel requires dozens of rowers, many of whom come from the humble layers of the population. This collective effort is not only military, it also shapes political life, as giving the rowers an essential role raises the social status of the less fortunate. Furthermore, the idea of entrusting such a large part of the city's fate to the waves is new. Many aristocrats prefer to rely on hoplites, versed in pitched battles on land. But the fear of an overwhelming Persian navy and Themistocles' enthusiasm eventually overcome the doubts. Meanwhile, Sparta, the city renowned for its military discipline, also monitors the evolving Persian threat. Possessing Greece's best infantry, it primarily wants to focus on defending the Peloponnesian Peninsula. The ephors, these influential magistrates, convey alarming reports from the Achaemenid Empire to the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. They speak of a gigantic army, gathering contingents from Egypt to Bactria. Sparta, despite its legendary courage, realizes it cannot face the vast Persian coalition alone. It therefore resolves, albeit with hesitation, to consider the possibility of a military alliance with Athens, Corinth, Aegina, and other major cities. even if the very idea of closely cooperating with Athens triggers endless debates. In this context, where Athens prioritizes its navy and Sparta its hoplite formations, forming a common front encounters difficulties. The Greeks have a long history of rivalries. Thebes, for example, maintains an old antagonism with Athens, while Corinth fears the growing commercial power of its Attic neighbor. Debates are polarized around two questions: who will lead the coalition and how to distribute the defensive efforts. Sparta, strong in its military prestige, claims supreme command of the land forces. Athens, represented by the voice of Themistocles, hopes to obtain a form of leadership over the naval strategy. However, persuading other cities like Megara or Plataea to accept this duopoly is not easy. Aware of the imminent peril, delegations set out to seek the opinion of Delphi, hoping to hear a clear word in favor of union. The responses delivered by the Pythia remain ambiguous, further fueling divergences. Yet, a consensus finally emerges. The Persian power is so vast that it will necessarily require a comprehensive alliance. Galvanized by the example of Marathon, Greece understands that while Athens was able to defeat a Persian detachment, only the coordination of the city-states will prevent the enemy from achieving its goals. Emissaries travel the roads between Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and other political centers, negotiating clauses, promising support in troops and supplies, while accommodating the susceptibilities of the different local aristocracies. Around 481, before Christ, this diplomacy results in the creation of a Pan-Hellenic League. Sparta is recognized as the military leader on land due to its martial tradition and the fear it instills in its neighbors. Athens, increasingly respected for its willingness to build a substantial navy, prepares to play a major role in naval strategy. Themistocles insists that the defense be organized around two key points. On land, they must block the invaders' route in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, while at sea, a confrontation is planned in the Artemisium area. This distribution aims to simultaneously contain the Persian army and fleet, while allowing the Greeks to exploit their respective strengths. But even before action is taken, frictions arise within the League. Athens is struggling to complete the construction of its fleet, while Sparta sends early contingents northward, observing the Persian advance. Some cities, less convinced by the scale of the threat, hesitate to send all their troops. Voices also rise to criticize Themistocles' naval gamble, believing that the essential battle will be on land. Conversely, proponents of naval reinforcement fear that the League is underestimating the maneuverability of the Persian fleet. Nevertheless, negotiations continue. They determine the size of contingents, plan to coordinate signals between ships, and strive to maintain high collective morale. As the Greeks are still settling these final details, anxiety grows. Informants report that Xerxes has already ordered the crossing of the Hellespont, and that he has an armada capable of threatening the entire Aegean coast. The anxiety is such that some propose retreating further south to the Isthmus of Corinth, abandoning Boeotia and Attica. However, Themistocles and other influential voices argue that the enemy must be stopped as soon as possible. This resolute position ultimately seals the final agreement. The Pan-Hellenic League approves the defensive strategy at Thermopylae and Artemisium, while maintaining the possibility of a coordinated retreat if the situation becomes too critical. The time for action is now, born by a Greek union that is fragile but determined. In the spring of 480 before Christ, Persian King Xerxes, I embarked on one of the largest military campaigns of antiquity, the Second Invasion of Greece. The critical starting point of this campaign was the crossing of the Hellespont, a narrow maritime strait separating Asia Minor from Europe, which corresponds to today's Dardanelles Strait in Turkey. According to historical tradition reported by Herodotus, the first attempt to construct the bridge was thwarted by a violent storm that destroyed part of the infrastructure. Xerxes, furious, allegedly ordered the sea to be symbolically punished by whipping, out of superstition, and to assert his absolute authority. Once this setback was overcome, the Persian engineers managed to consolidate the structure by aligning hundreds of boats side by side in several rows. Wooden walkways, covered with planks and earth, now allowed the orderly passage of thousands of soldiers and animals. After crossing the strait, the Persian army progressed towards the north of the Aegean Sea, bypassing Thrace. In these regions, some local leaders, aware of the impotence of their meager troops against the Persian forces, opted for a form of collaboration or cautious submission. Thus, Thracian tribes and various coastal cities preferred to negotiate with Xerxes rather than risk certain destruction. For his part, King Alexander I of Macedonia, not to be confused with the future Alexander the Great, declared himself a vassal of the Persian Empire. It was both a strategic act and a means of preserving the relative autonomy of his dynasty. In Macedonia, this partial submission did not necessarily mean enthusiastic adherence to the Persian cause. It was rather a compromise aimed at limiting destruction and buying time in the event of a change in situation. While the Persians set up their camps and consolidated their control over the region, some Macedonians discreetly tried to maintain contact with the Greek cities of the south. However, the massive presence of Xerxes' troops, combined with the fear of possible reprisals, deterred most local populations from any open resistance. The progression of the Persian army thus continued towards Thessaly, at the heart of the fertile plains of northern Greece. In Thessaly, Greek resistance proved to be as limited as it was in the north. Local aristocratic families, on whom the stability of the region depended, found themselves in a delicate position. Without real military aid coming from the south, they hesitated to oppose the Persians directly. Several regional factions preferred to leave their fate in Xerxes' hands, hoping to maintain their privileges. However, in some towns, modest contingents attempted to resist briefly, convinced that an honorable defeat was better than a shameful surrender. Strategically, these skirmishes remained minor and hardly slowed the methodical march of the immense Persian army ever closer to central Greece. During this advance, Xerxes sent embassies to several major cities and strategic regions. The Persian emissaries came to demand the delivery of water and earth, a symbolic formula signifying the recognition of Achaemenid authority. By offering these elements, one acknowledged Persian sovereignty over their own land. The implicit threat was clear. Refusal amounted to exposure to the wrath of the great king. In some localities, fear of reprisals prevailed, and they symbolically delivered the requested tribute. In others, more concerned with their independence, the embassies were firmly rejected, sometimes even at the cost of violent actions against the messengers. In the face of these contrasting reactions, Xerxes maintained the image of a magnanimous sovereign towards those who submitted and ruthless towards the recalcitrant. This carrot and stick policy affirmed the superiority of the Achaemenid Empire while avoiding, as much as possible, unnecessary and costly confrontations. Cities that chose obedience generally obtained the guarantee of not being plundered or deported. Conversely, those refusing to cooperate faced destruction and enslavement. Many communities, especially among the smaller ones, found it more reasonable to pledge their loyalty to Xerxes, hoping to avoid the worst consequences of a direct war. Battle of Thermopylae, which takes place in 480 before Christ, is the scene of an episode in Greek history and the confrontation with the Persian Empire. Located in the center of mainland Greece, the pass of Thermopylae is on the east coast, between steep mountains and the waters of the Gulf of Malea. This narrow corridor, which can at times be only a few meters wide, serves as the only passage for anyone wishing to traverse the region from north to south. The name Thermopylae means hot gates, referring to the hot springs that gush nearby, creating a thermal area. In this context, the topography, both mountainous and maritime, plays a crucial strategic role. Naturally, the narrowness of the passage provides a defensive advantage to those who stand there. In the 5th century before Christ, when a large-scale army attempts to advance southwards into Greece, it is forced to take this corridor. The surrounding mountains greatly reduce the possibility of wide deployment, while the proximity of the sea limits flanking maneuvers. However, this location also has some drawbacks. Supplying provisions can prove challenging for a large army, and the confined space can lead to troop congestion if there is a great influx. Despite these difficulties, the Greeks quickly realized that, on such a confined terrain, the cohesion of their hoplite phalanxes could neutralize the numerical superiority of the Persians. Beyond its tactical appeal, Thermopylae holds a strong symbolic significance for Greek civilization. Since archaic times, this site has been associated with local legends and abundant cults, notably because the region is renowned for its healing waters. Furthermore, in earlier times, several cities had already defended this passage against incursions from the north, cementing the idea that this pass embodies the protective gateway to central Greece. In the mindset of Greek citizens, Thermopylae represents a natural bulwark that can be defended against a more powerful adversary, provided the strategy is skillfully executed. This symbolic dimension profoundly marks the direct mentality of the hoplites on station before the confrontation. It is in this context that the Greek forces set out towards Thermopylae, determined to delay the Persian offensive. According to the most coherent estimates available in ancient accounts, the Greek coalition fields about 7,000 hoplites. The term hoplite refers to the heavily armed infantrymen typical of Greek city-states, equipped with a round shield called a hoplon, a spear, a short sword, and a cuirass. Among these thousands of soldiers is a famous contingent, the 300 Spartans led by one of the 2 kings of Sparta, Leonidas. At the time, Sparta is governed by 2 simultaneous kings from different lineages. Leonidas, reputed for his bravery and integrity, has decided to take command on the field. Alongside the Spartans, other cities have sent representatives, forming a defensive alliance. Among these allies are contingents from Thespians, Thebans, Corinthians, and Arcadians, although not all are present in significant numbers. The Thespians, originating from the region of Boeotia, send several hundred men, aware of the danger that the Persian advance could pose to their city. As for the Thebans, they are more hesitant, caught up in political games, and accused of sympathizing with the great king. Nevertheless, at this point, a part of their hoplites joins the coalition. In the minds of these cities, a victory or a significant delay imposed on the enemy would be crucial for their collective survival. The Persian army fields imposing numbers. Although Herodotus mentions a total of 2.6 million soldiers, this figure is largely exaggerated and implausible. Modern estimates, based on the logistics and capacities of the Achaemenid Empire, place Xerxes I's forces between 70,000 and 300,000 men, with a commonly accepted range around 100,000 to 150,000 combatants. Whatever the case, the Persian army far surpasses the Greek forces in number and encompasses a great diversity of peoples from all over the Achaemenid Empire. It relies notably on its light infantry, its swift and formidable cavalry, and above all, its elite corps, the Immortals. These, armed with bows, spears, and lighter shields than those of the Greek hoplites, enjoy great mobility, giving them a significant advantage in open terrain. Xerxes. Masu's presence in the expedition itself illustrates the stakes of this campaign. Tactically, the Persians rely on their numerical superiority and the fear their reputation inspires. The Greeks, on their side, know that losing Thermopylae would open a direct route for the invaders to the southern cities. Both parties prepare meticulously, aware of the consequences of victory or defeat. Shortly before the Persian arrival, the Greeks restore and fortify what is known as the Phocian Wall, a construction from an earlier period, likely built to block the passage through the pass using the natural obstacle of the terrain. This structure, although partly dilapidated, serves to strengthen the defensive position. Behind this rampart, the hoplites organize themselves in tight ranks, optimizing the use of their spears in the confined space. The Greek commanders aim to intercept the Persian vanguard and inflict heavy losses before Xerxes can deploy his full force. In such an environment, the long hoplite spear, used in compact ranks, can indeed neutralize the approach of cavalry or light infantry, too cramped to maneuver freely. Simultaneously, human organization in the Greek camp is methodical. Leonidas and the other contingent leaders distribute tasks, monitoring entry points, distributing supplies, and maintaining troop morale. As for the Persians, they set up their initial units not far from the northern entrance of the pass, awaiting the rest of their forces. Xerxes had hoped that a display of his might would encourage the Greeks to flee or surrender. However, days pass without any sign of capitulation. The Spartans, in particular, expressed their determination to fight to the end, aware of the ripple effect Sparta's example might have on other cities. In this atmosphere, tension mounts as the confrontation becomes inevitable. In the steep pass of Thermopylae, the morning mist struggles to conceal the enormous mass of Persian soldiers gathered at the entrance to the pass. Xerxes I orders an ultimatum to be delivered to the small Greek force positioned between the sea and the mountain. According to tradition, the Persian message demands unconditional surrender and the handing over of weapons. Leonidas, king of Sparta and commander of the defenders, is said to have replied in a sober but firm tone, "Come and take them." This response, later famous, rings like a challenge to Xerxes' immense army. The Persians believe they can swiftly sweep away the Greek resistance. The first assault waves begin by late morning. Long phalanxes of Persian soldiers, equipped with light armor and various weapons, try to force the passage. However, the narrow configuration of Thermopylae, wedged between the sea to the north and steep mountains to the south, significantly reduces the Persian numerical superiority. The Greeks, arranged in tight ranks, form a nearly impenetrable wall of shields. Each is protected by the shield of his neighbor, while the long hoplite spears, pointed forward, meet the Persian charge. The Achaemenid soldiers, unaccustomed to fighting in such confined spaces, struggle to gain the upper hand. Despite their determination and desire to impress Xerxes, their successive waves are stopped dead by the Greek discipline and defensive armament. By late afternoon, the Persian army is still suffering a crushing failure. The Greeks, although vastly outnumbered, demonstrate remarkable cohesion. The tight formation appears as a solid barrier, rigorously maintained by the Spartans and their allies. Leonidas, stationed at the heart of the setup, oversees every repositioning, ensuring the lines remain compact. Seeing the stalemate, Xerxes orders a pause for the night. This first day of combat, which seemed destined for immediate Persian victory, ends with an unexpected situation. The invader has not managed to cross the pass. The Persians must admit that the Greek resistance is far better organized than they had imagined. At sunrise, Xerxes, unhappy with the turn of events, orders the resumption of attacks. This time, the Persian command seeks to adopt a more coordinated strategy. Instead of sending regular troops in the first echelon, they decide to engage the dreaded Immortals. This elite unit, ideally 10,000 strong, is renowned for its martial prowess and imposing appearance. Commanded by seasoned officers, the Immortals advance in a more disciplined formation to try and break through the enemy line. In Xerxes' mind, this elite force must shatter the Greek defense where other detachments have failed. However, the topography remains unchanged. The narrowness of Thermopylae prevents the Persians from fully deploying their most mobile forces. The archers cannot easily maneuver to encircle the enemy, and the Immortals, too, suffer from the terrible hoplite defensive advantage. The Greeks, adept at close combat techniques, exploit every lapse in attention and continuously rotate along the front line. When some hoplites tire or get injured, they are quickly replaced to keep the ranks steadfast. A spiral of concentrated violence in a narrow corridor. This bloody confrontation exhausts the morale of both the Persians and the Greeks, who nonetheless suffer increasing casualties. As the day progresses, Xerxes becomes increasingly nervous. He observes from his elevated throne, set on a platform to dominate the battle scene. According to later accounts, the Persians allegedly sounded the drums and played fanfares multiple times to galvanize their troops, hoping to instill panic in the enemy. Yet, the Greek formation holds firm, even repelling several flanking actions. The Greeks also benefit from a wider area behind the Phocian wall, an existing fortification in the pass, to slightly retreat, tend to the wounded, and draw water. Although each new Persian attempt is launched with fervor, no definitive breach appears in the Greek defense. By the end of this second day, there are losses on both sides, but the Greek line stands firm, while Xerxes' frustrations mount. It is during the evening of this second day that the controversial figure of Ephialtes emerges, a man from the region of Malis. For reasons that remain debated, thirst for financial reward, greed, or desire for prestige, Ephialtes approaches the Persians and delivers a decisive piece of information. There exists a little-known path, sometimes called the Anopeia path, which bypasses Thermopylae through the heights. This narrow path, winding between rocks and forests, would allow for a rear attack on the Greek forces. Until now, Leonidas doubted that the Persians would discover or exploit this difficult-to-access passage, protected by the Phocian garrison. Ephialtes' initiative changes everything. Informed of this route, Xerxes immediately dispatches a detachment to circumvent the Greek lines at night. According to some accounts, this detachment includes the Immortals led by Hydarnes because these troops are more seasoned and accustomed to delicate missions. Following the local guide, the Persians embark on the mountain, climbing a steep path where numerical strength loses its importance, but where the element of surprise proves decisive. Although a group of Phocians had been stationed by Leonidas on these heights, these soldiers, fewer in number, misjudged the Persian intent. Seeing the column of Immortals advancing, they retreated further up to try to protect their own villages, convinced that the attack was directly targeting their lands. Thus, the way leading to the rear of the Greek hoplites is left open. By morning, Xerxes' army is able to encircle Leonidas' contingent. When Leonidas learns at the beginning of this third day that the Persians have bypassed his position, he immediately understands the magnitude of the threat. The Greeks, now threatened on all sides, lose the advantage conferred by the narrowness of the pass. Leonidas then gathers the leaders of the allied cities to discuss the course of action. Ancient sources suggest he decides to send back the majority of the Greek contingents to preserve their forces for future battles. The Spartans, bound by an unyielding code of honor, choose to remain on site alongside Leonidas, along with a number of Thespians eager to fight to the end. The Thebans, also present, find themselves caught up. Some of them, not inclined to resist, eventually surrender, or are forced to do so. Thus reduced to a few hundred men, the Greek forces prepare for a final heroic defense. In the morning, Xerxes orders the final assault. The Persians, now able to take the hoplites from behind, advance from the front and the rear, harassing the Greek lines that no longer have any possibility of retreat. Despite this hopeless situation, Leonidas and his Spartans charge into a fierce melee. Shields clash, spears break, and the Greeks resort to using their short swords, or even anything they can get their hands on. The accounts describe scenes of rare violence, where every square meter of ground is fiercely contested in a climate of resolute determination. Here, it is no longer about repelling the enemy, but about falling with weapons in hand in the purest Spartan tradition, to defend the honor of their city and the soil of Greece. Leonidas perishes in battle, quickly followed by most of his comrades in arms. The surviving Spartans make an effort to recover their king's body, trying to prevent its desecration by the Persians. However, the encirclement is complete, and the outcome is sealed. Before noon, the last Greek stronghold is silenced, sealing the tactical victory for Xerxes. The few survivors, including some Thebans, surrender or are taken prisoner. In the span of 3 days, a legendary episode has just been written. Standing against such a vast and determined adversary, and then dying on the battlefield, would nourish for centuries the collective memory of Greece and, later, Europe. Although the Persian victory is undeniable from a military standpoint, it is not without painful consequences for Xerxes. The Persians, to everyone's surprise, have suffered very heavy losses in these frontal battles. The unwavering defense of the Greek phalanx over 2 long days has significantly hurt Persian morale and caused a high number of deaths and injuries in the invading army. Herodotus claims that the Persians lost about 20,000 men. Xerxes, according to various sources, had mixed reactions: admiration for the Spartans' bravery, but also irritation for having to expend so many resources and lives to take a simple pass that his numerical superiority should have made easy to cross. Despite the tragic end of the defenders, their sacrifice impressed all the Greeks. Still in shock, the allied cities received the news with a mix of sadness and pride. The death of Leonidas enhances Sparta's prestige, whose image of courage will forever be tied to this now sacred place. Beyond the material loss, the Greek camp finds in this battle a powerful symbol of heroism. Orators will constantly remind of the example of these few men who, aware of their inferiority, chose to fight fiercely rather than retreat. The naval battle of Artemisium is a crucial episode, though often less famous than the land defense at Thermopylae, in the conflict opposing the Persian Empire to the coalition of several Greek city-states at the beginning of the 5th century before Christ. For an international audience not yet familiar with these events, it is important to understand that the Greeks not only sought to slow the Persian advance by land, they also played the maritime card to protect their rear, control the sea routes, and leverage their advantage in oared navigation. Artemisium, located on the northern coast of the island of Euboea in central Greece, faced the Aegean Sea and was a key strategic point. Its geographic positioning allowed for the surveillance and, if possible, interception of the Persian fleet before they could land troops or circumvent the land defenders. While Leonidas and his contingent took position in the pass of Thermopylae to stop or slow down the massive Persian army, the Greek navy, on the other hand, had the mission of blocking Xerxes' fleet at Artemisium. This parallel between the two fronts, terrestrial and maritime, was not a mere coincidence, but rather the result of strategic meetings, notably led by a politician and strategist of Athens, Themistocles. The Greeks knew that in case of failure at sea, the Persian troops could easily provide land reinforcements and outflank the fortified position of Thermopylae. Conversely, if the land forces were to fall too quickly, the Greek fleet risked being isolated, unable to protect the coasts and, above all, unable to defend Athens. Thus, this synchronization of actions illustrates the precarious but real alliance between various Hellenic cities, united by the same objective, to contain Xerxes' advance on all fronts. However, coordinating two distinct fronts was not easy. Lines of communication, information about the advancement of Persian troops, and even the weather at sea played a primary role in the rhythm of the battles. At this stage, their objective was not to completely destroy the Persian fleet, considered much larger, but to prevent it from passing unimpeded through strategic maritime passages. The Greeks hoped to take advantage of the local topography. The coast of Artemisium forms a sort of natural corridor, forcing enemy ships to use a relatively narrow passage, a constraint that could limit the Persian numerical superiority. In this way, they aimed to defend the northern access of the island of Euboea, essential for the continuation of operations in central Greece. At the time when Leonidas and his allies were resisting at Thermopylae, the situation at sea was equally tense. The very large Persian fleet included ships from various satrapies of the empire, Phoenicians, Egyptians, and other peoples under Persian domination. Xerxes had instructed his admirals to crush any Greek naval opposition, as a quick success at sea would provide colossal logistical support to his army, with the possibility of transporting supplies, horses, and reinforcements by boat, thus facilitating the land progression. It is in this context that the Greek navy, composed of more than 200 triremes, with a good portion belonging to Athens, but also to other cities of the Hellenic League, positioned itself near Cape Artemisium. The precise choice of this location responded to the desire to block the maritime flanks, and eventually to prevent the Persian fleet from having direct access to the Greek hinterlands. The first days of the naval confrontation, simultaneous with the Persian assaults against Thermopylae, resulted in several skirmishes. As soon as Greek scouts signaled the approach of Persian ships, contingents of triremes would go out to engage in combat. The idea was not to launch into a large-scale pitched battle, considered too risky against the massive numbers of the adversary, but rather to multiply surprise attacks and tactical maneuvers aimed at breaking the Persian formation. Greek captains constantly sought to provoke disorder within the enemy ranks, exploiting the more agile maneuverability of their triremes built for speed and mobility. In doing so, they managed to resist, or even inflict notable damage on the first contingents of Xerxes' fleet. However, the task remained arduous. The morale of the Greek sailors was suspended on the news from Thermopylae. Although Leonidas's bravery was already praised, many soldiers feared they would have to abandon everything if the Persians broke through the pass. Moreover, some Greek cities, like the islands near Euboea, hesitated to commit all their naval forces, preferring a prudent retreat if the situation became too critical. Internal debates were intense. Should they continue to fight at the risk of suffering a crushing naval defeat, or execute a strategic withdrawal to protect the bulk of the fleet and prepare a later defense, perhaps further south, near Athens or in the Saronic Gulf? These dilemmas affected the Greek admirals, forced to constantly weigh the balance between boldness and the preservation of their resources. On the coast, observation posts often spotted the presence of Persian ships offshore. The alert Greek navy sometimes intercepted small convoys. These skirmishes, often brief and violent, were not enough to definitively destroy the enemy, but allowed them to delay its movements, scatter its forces, and force it to advance cautiously. In parallel, storms or violent winds, relatively frequent in the area at this season, could suddenly capsize dozens of ships. The Greeks, more skilled at maneuvering in these waters, sometimes saw an advantage in this. However, the meteorological uncertainty also imposed great stress on their crews, who feared being trapped between the sturdy Persian fleet and a raging sea. The news of the terrestrial disaster at Thermopylae quickly reached Artemisium, completely changing the naval dynamic. The encirclement and death of Leonidas, as well as the rout of the few thousand men positioned in the pass, signaled the collapse of the front on land. Faced with this catastrophe, the leaders of the Greek fleet were forced into a crucial decision: remain and continue the naval battle at Artemisium despite the loss of the main terrestrial lock, or withdraw to defend more southern positions. The necessity to preserve the navy, now the only force capable of protecting the cities of Attica and the Peloponnese, prevailed. The admirals understood that holding at Artemisium without sufficient land forces would put them in grave danger, given that a part of the Persian army could now threaten to land behind them. After long debates, the decision was made to retreat. The Greek triremes left Artemisium, aware that the loss of Thermopylae opened a direct path for Xerxes to the heart of central Greece and Attica. Despite the retreat, the Greeks had nevertheless accomplished a partial mission to slow the Persian naval advance and inflict notable losses along the way. This movement of retreat was not a sign of weakness, however. It was more of a calculated maneuver to protect the fleet, a vital asset if they were to defend the cities of Attica or the Peloponnese. The Greeks attempted, as much as possible, to move in good order to the south, so as not to lose too many ships during this operation. Damaged vessels were towed or abandoned according to their condition, and the wounded were transferred onto the most stable triremes. Thus, the entirety of the naval force, although diminished, remained operational for the upcoming battle. This evacuation marked the end of the short but intense naval campaign at Artemisium, which had lasted as long as the defense of Thermopylae. Now, the sea and land routes to Athens were almost free. The Persians had just achieved two strategic successes that seemed decisive: the neutralization of the pass and the abandonment of Artemisium by the Greek fleet. Yet, these victories were not without consequence for Xerxes. On one hand, the Persian army had suffered significant losses and was beginning to feel the strain of logistics. On the other hand, the Persian fleet had not genuinely annihilated the Greek navy, only forced it to relocate. In the aftermath, Xerxes quickly advanced towards the city of Athens. The city, aware of the impossibility of defending its walls against the imposing Persian land force, decided on a drastic measure, the evacuation of the population. In a courageous and unprecedented in Athenian history vote, the women, children, and some of the men unable to fight were transferred to the nearby island of Salamis. The inhabitants left Athens in haste, abandoning temples, houses, and belongings, hoping to find on Salamis the security offered by the still intact Greek navy. It was a vast logistical operation. Triremes and transport ships shuttled to move as many civilians as possible, while those deemed fit for war joined the ranks of the army or navy. When Xerxes entered the city, he found almost no one. Frustrated, or simply to set an example, he is said to have ordered the looting and burning of certain sacred buildings, including the sanctuaries of the Acropolis. Thus, for the first time, Athens fell into the hands of a conqueror, suffering partial destruction and a highly symbolic profanation. This violence, relayed by word of mouth by refugees, caused widespread fear among the other Greek cities. Important southern cities like Corinth, Megara, and Sparta weighed the risks with even greater urgency, realizing that after Athens, Xerxes would move towards the Peloponnese if not stopped. This dramatic context caused a shockwave among the hesitant Greeks. The flight from Athens was no longer just a distant event, but a fact attesting to Persian power and its determination to crush any resistance. Already some cities were rallying more to the idea of a common defense, as it became clear that if they did not unite, they would suffer the same fate. The role of Themistocles, Athens' visionary strategist, then became considerably significant. He urged the representatives of the different cities to exploit the naval advantage once again, arguing that land warfare would be immediately more difficult against the overwhelming Persian superiority. The main idea was to force Xerxes into a large naval battle in narrow waters, reducing the numerical impact of his fleet. During the year 480 before Christ, when the Persian army of Xerxes seemed invincible, after its land victory at Thermopylae, a major turning point was about to occur in the choppy waters off Attica. Salamis, a small island not far from Athens, became the scene of a decisive confrontation for the future of Greece. The Greek cities, despite their ongoing rivalries, had understood that the only viable strategy to curb the enormous Persian fleet was to draw the enemy into a narrow maritime space, conducive to the maneuvers of the Greek triremes, which were lighter and easier to maneuver than the massive Persian ships. At the head of the Greeks, the Athenian Themistocles emerged as one of the most brilliant strategists of his time. He was able to convince his allies to face Xerxes' fleet in the strait separating Salamis from the mainland, despite the reluctance of several cities that feared another failure. After the capture of Athens, Xerxes I was at the height of his advance into mainland Greece. Convinced that the Hellenic resistance was on the verge of collapsing, he was already considering the total submission of the remaining cities. However, the Greeks, spurred by Themistocles, knew that the war could only be won at sea. The Persian land army was too numerous to be defeated directly, but its fleet, though imposing, remained vulnerable in confined spaces. Themistocles, a cunning strategist, then implemented a bold ploy. He sent a false message to Xerxes, letting him believe that the Greeks were divided and ready to flee, with some even considering surrendering. This ruse wounded the pride of the great king, who did not want to let his enemies escape him. Persuaded that he held the opportunity for a total victory, Xerxes immediately ordered his fleet to encircle Salamis to trap the Greeks. The Persians, confident in their numerical superiority, gradually entered the strait. But what they did not know was that the Greeks were waiting for precisely this maneuver. By tightening the combat space, the Hellenic triremes gained a decisive advantage. They were more maneuverable, better coordinated, and supported by an experienced crew. Xerxes, observing the scene from a throne set on a hill overlooking the battlefield, did not yet realize that he had fallen into a carefully orchestrated trap. The clash began at the first light of day. The Greeks, better trained for close combat at sea, sought to ram the enemy hulls by taking advantage of their knowledge of the terrain. The Persian ships were quickly scattered, with several running aground, striking reefs their pilots could not see or did not know about. Uncertainty reigned among the Persian command echelons, each admiral having to manage his own squadron amidst the chaos. Xerxes himself, installed on a land promontory, expected to admire a quick victory. Instead, he witnessed the disintegration of his naval ranks. In a few hours, the smaller but more agile Greek fleet managed to break the Persian line and sow confusion. Many Persian ships fled, while others attempted to regroup too late. By the end of the day, it was clear that the battle was turning in favor of the Greeks. Although their losses were not negligible, they had dealt an humiliating setback to Xerxes, thereby asserting their tactical superiority. This episode marks a real turning point in the Second Greco-Persian War, as it signaled the end of the absolute confidence the Persians had in the invincibility of their offensive. After the debacle of his fleet, Xerxes worried about the possibility of being cut off from his supply lines. Although he still had a formidable land army, resources and coordination with his maritime bases were essential to continue his campaign. Fearing that the now victorious Greek fleet might threaten his lines of communication, he decided to leave Greece with part of his troops and return to Asia Minor. However, he left a strong garrison under the command of his general Mardonius to continue the war the following year. This partial retreat testifies to the considerable psychological impact of the Battle of Salamis. Not only were the Persians losing the initiative at sea, but Xerxes' authority itself was weakened, with his officers now doubting the infallibility of their sovereign. The Battle of Salamis, as decisive as it was, did not immediately end the invasion. The Persians were still trying to maintain their presence in Greece, while the Hellenic cities, encouraged by this naval success, were preparing for further land battles. The following months were marked by intense diplomatic negotiations, not only between Greeks and Persians, but also among different Greek cities, to determine the strategy to adopt. Sparta, primarily a land power, insisted on delivering a decisive battle on Greek soil. Athens, buoyed by its recent naval demonstration, considered that the Persian threat at sea should be eliminated first. Ultimately, the year 479, before Christ saw the decisive confrontation on the battlefield of Plataea in Boeotia. Under the command of Mardonius, the Persian army positioned itself near Plataea to face the Hellenic coalition, now more united than before. The Greeks, understanding that the final clash was inevitable, gathered probably the largest hoplite army ever assembled in Greece. According to Herodotus, the Greek army numbered about 110,000 men, while modern estimates place it closer to 80,000 fighters. On the Persian side, Herodotus's figures reach 300,000 soldiers, but contemporary analyses estimate their strength between 70,000 and 120,000 men. The course of the battle illustrates the solidity of hoplite combat formation. The formidable Spartan discipline played yet another central role. The death of Mardonius on the battlefield and the collapse of the Persian organization marked the end of the invasion. The surviving Persians retreated northward, then quickly crossed the Greek borders. This failure put an end to the greatest offensive ever launched by the Achaemenid Empire against the Greek world. During the same period, the Greek naval victory at Mycale in Ionia definitively completed the Persian debacle. Xerxes' fleet, already weakened, was unable to withstand the Hellenic resurgence on the coast of Asia Minor. The Battle of Salamis granted Athens immense maritime prestige. Within a few years, the city, already proud of its democratic system, discovered a new role, that of protector of the Greek seas. The Athenian triremes, originally financed by the revenues from the silver mines of Laurion, symbolized the success of a naval defense and expansion policy long promoted by Themistocles. After the end of the Greco-Persian Wars, Athens maintained and strengthened its navy, naturally positioning itself as the leader of an alliance of city-states, the Delian League. This league, initially conceived to continue hostilities against the Persians in the Aegean Sea and elsewhere, quickly transformed into a tool of influence. Athens imposed its hegemony through naval power, collecting tributes from island or coastal cities in exchange for their protection. Opponents of this policy already saw the beginnings of Athenian imperialism, which would inevitably provoke sharp tensions within the Greek world. But for the moment, Athens rose to the forefront of maritime powers and took pride in having crushed the Persian fleet at a critical moment. Sparta retains prestige linked to Thermopylae, despite later, more discreet land participation. If Salamis offered Athens a new status, Sparta, for its part, remained the city symbolizing Greek virtues, that is, bravery and discipline. The still vivid memory of the sacrifice led by King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans at Thermopylae a year earlier upheld the formidable reputation of the Lacedaemonians. Although in the Battle of Salamis, the Spartans did not play a leading naval role, they remained the undisputed leaders of the land coalition. At Plataea, their discipline and bravery once again left a mark. Nevertheless, this golden age of Spartan prestige already contained the seeds of future tensions. As Athens asserted its power at sea, Sparta had to reckon with the fact that it was no longer the sole stronghold of Greek power. This growing polarization would lead a few decades later to the Peloponnesian War. For the Persian Empire, the Battle of Salamis and the Battle of Plataea primarily signified the failure of a total conquest of Greece. Xerxes, already returned to Asia Minor after the naval defeat, never again sent a massive expedition to subdue the Hellenic cities. Although some regions of Ionia remained under Persian control for a time, the rapid counterattack by the Greek city-states gradually reduced Achaemenid influence in the Aegean. However, the Persian Empire did not collapse for all that. Its vast territories still spanned from Central Asia to Egypt, and it retained immense economic and diplomatic power. Perhaps the most notable consequence lies in the transformation of the perception that the Greeks and, more broadly, the West had of this empire deemed invincible. Salamis demonstrated that a determined coalition, even if less numerous, could prevail thanks to an adapted strategy and a fierce common will. The Persians, reputed for their art of governing multiple peoples through the satrapy system, did not manage to impose a lasting domination in Greece. Over time, this episode became the symbol of a gigantic empire forced to retreat before smaller but united cities. The impact of the Greek victory, whether at Salamis or Plataea, transcended the mere military framework. In Greek literature and art, the epic of liberation became an immortal subject of celebration. Tragedians, poets, and historians, foremost among them Herodotus, sometimes called the father of history, seized upon these events to forge a common memory foundational to Hellenic identity. Later, Plutarch, in his Parallel Lives, revisited the major figures of the conflict, exalting Spartan courage and Athenian cunning. This narration of the victory gave birth to the idea of Greek freedom, a concept opposed to what the city-states considered the barbarian tyranny of the Persian Empire. The term barbarian, in the Greek view, encompassed all those who did not speak Greek and whose customs seemed brutal or foreign. The propaganda following the victory exaggerated these traits. On one side, an empire of immense scale but devoid of freedom. On the other, small independent city-states united by the quest for political autonomy. The impact of this confrontation extended into Western culture. The struggle for independence against an overwhelming empire became a recurring motif, revisited at various times to glorify patriotism or the spirit of resistance. The notion of freedom, exalted by the Attic orators, helped shape Athens' political ideology, and then, through the conquest of Alexander the Great and Roman influence, was transmitted to part of the Mediterranean world. The heroization of Leonidas in Sparta, the praise of Themistocles in Athens, and the paradoxical figure of Xerxes envying Greek bravery served as literary and symbolic references for centuries.